A belated welcome to our Monday Live.
We nearly had trouble.
I'm more relaxed than James because I don't have to deal with tech issues because I'm completely ignorant.
Yeah, not nervous about hitting shots at all now.
So to those of you that are still with us, thank you very much for bearing with us on this one. For some reason, our internet decided to completely disconnect itself.
Yeah, full server reboot. So we should have a solid stream now. So thanks for joining us. This is a bit
proves it's live.
Last week you had Morecambe and Wise. I think this week you got Little and Large or Cannon and Ball. So, yeah, thank you for joining us. So today we are going to be, this is part one of my iron fitting. 45 now, so I've decided every 5 years I'll treat myself to a new set of irons. Not expecting miracles, which you'll probably allude to.
No, yeah, I think
with me.
For any of our equipment when we redo it, you'd hope we do a good job of setting up in the first place. So a bit like my driver, small changes. And not expecting massive differences here with James today. So I think realistically we're going to be doing a little bit of fine tuning. We're going to look at get a base bit of data with James' existing clubs, and then just go through some of the different options and really look at what's working, why it's worth working, why it isn't working, but see if we can get a little bit more. Niels, thank you for staying with us. Very loyal to stick with that blank screen 15 minutes.
There's also another debut today. Matty is solo on drums today, so he's going to be helping us out with filming in my absence.
Yeah, Stuart's been battling around Princes, I believe, today.
Yeah, so, the Kent Open.
Kent Open, yeah.
So we've got three precision golfers there. Paul Nestling, who I believe at the last time of checking was one off the lead at 4 under, having finished.
Easy game apparently.
And Stuart and Lewis as well, so I'm sure we'll hear all the details. But hey, what a great part on 18 from Charlie Hull. That's
well, I was going to say,
saved her a few bob.
With the hole out the bunker shot, the long part there. I think ultimately Miss Vu was just too good for everyone. Charlie was great, and great to have a home hope who's up there, and 2 second place finishes in major this year, so it's really pretty impressive. And I think alluded to when chatting with Stuart about it earlier a few weeks back, how I think getting that diagnosis, understanding kind of who she is maybe a little bit more, is helping her really settle into her game this year. And I think next year, I think we can all expect some pretty big things. Looking pretty good.
Lovely.
So
what do you do with your hands?
Not a lot. Okay. No, just kind of stand, trying to work out what to do with them, not be uncomfortable.
Right. Well,
so
I'll put my glove
seeing
on.
as we have a little bit delay, we'll get started with James with his data. So current set of gamers.
So I've been to the range. I've hit 100 balls.
Yeah, warn yourself
500.
Perfect.
Actually, a very, very interesting point. When coming for a fitting, it's advantageous not to hit any balls because often you can get burnout before you're fitting.
Mr. Priestley,
lovely.
In the UK on a jolly from the States. It's normally the other way around, so it's nice to see it that way around.
Well, if you're anywhere near Surrey, do pop by for a coffee or a cup of tea.
Cup of tea, yes. Yeah. Do a mean cup of tea.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to hit some listeners.
Current gamers.
So
current gamers are
PXG Gen 2 311P. Built these for my 40th.
So he's now got to hold it in the right place. And sitting there shaking his head from behind the camera.
Look at Matty and go up, down. And look, they're great heads. I really do enjoy the performance of the clubs, but just fancied a bit of a change. In the shafts, I play with the AeroTech Steelfiber I110 constant weight, the stiff. They're a great shaft for me, a little bit harsh every now and again, but I probably play 15, 20 times a year.
Yeah, and the key thing with the constant weight on those, and what that actually means is that there is a 3-iron shaft, 4-iron shaft, 5-iron shaft, in the same way in a set of irons, the weight progresses up the set a little bit, whereas a lot of graphite iron shafts are parallel tips, so it's just a unitized shaft. So there's one blank that you trim to suit the club, so tip trim a little bit more as you go down the set towards the pitch wedge. But what that creates is a descending weight set, so they get lighter as you go into the short irons, whereas actually we'd generally look for them to go up a little bit, which is why in steel they progress up a little bit. So there aren't that many composites that do that. So that's why in the steel fibers we'll generally always try and use the constant weights. Right?
Okay, let's get to it.
So
when I said join in and heckle, I didn't mean heckle. Yeah. This isn't a Monday night roast.
So James's action actually from a fitting point of view is quite quirky one to fit with because, so from all the time in the workshop, very strong hand and forearm. So in terms of any kind of compensation or collection that James has to make is done, it's a strong move. So with the tendency to take the club away a little on the inside, pick the club up a little bit, the club's then got to reroute down a little bit. And so very, very sensitive to changes in weight. So a lot of speed. So club speed there, 88, 89 miles an hour. Its distance definitely isn't an issue, but getting the club face under control, that's always been where, it's a consistency of shot that really is the key thing. And so, from an action point of view, it actually makes James pretty sensitive to weight change. But the steel fibers you used for a number of years.
Yeah, and I do like them. And actually, the last few times I've played, whether or not I've been gripping the club a little bit too high up all the time, but I found that if I just gripped it down 1/4 of an inch and kind of aligned my thumb and forefinger at the top of the G of Golf Pride, they swung more easily, and they did turn over a lot more. So just an observation.
Yeah, and if you grip it down, anything you go up or down the shaft, you are changing the length of the lever and therefore the balance. So it can have some real kind of knock-on effects to timing by changing your grip position up and down the shaft. I know Stuart, from a coaching point of view, he doesn't like people gripping down particularly, from if I remember correctly. But then you're keeping the club swinging the same if you're gripping the club in the same place each time. So with these ones, from a flight point of view, action point of view, James generally kind of 3.5 or degrees down angle of attack. So that's pretty orthodox path, slightly into out, base angle pretty square. So a little bit behind there, but generally pretty neutral action. It's just for James, a lot of it is it's lack of play. That's really I think it's sort of sporadic plays that you kind of get a few games and then nothing, and then a few games and then nothing.
Yeah, not a great strike, but they're just starting for just a little bit hard work.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and I think that's. Are you finding miss-wise more that one to the left?
Yeah, the miss right has gone, having done some grip work with Stu a few years ago. The miss is left.
Yeah. Okay. So like that, starting pretty much online.
Yeah.
Tail away.
Yeah. But I'm starting to trust my game to aim right and try and draw it back, which I could never do before.
Okie dokie. Right. So, obviously these have worked well for a few years, and the Gen 2s, the older PXGs, are a slightly softer feel and sound. That's something the original infill was a little bit softer, and generally retained a little bit more spin than the current models. So, but essentially, if you're taking that batch of shots overall, I'm going to look at go to the average for those. You're looking at 15 launch, so mid, strong or mid, but then spin kind of mid, upper mid, so the two cancel one another out. So it's pretty good ball flight. There's not a lot of deviation on swing line. You're generally kind of 1.5, 2 degrees from in to out. That's pretty consistent. But as you say, face just tends to close over a little bit, hence those two left. But all in all, data pretty good. So we know. I mean, when we're going through a fitting, one of the things we're always looking at to start with, if it's James in the fitting bay or someone in for the first time, is how close do we think the current option is. So clearly, what I'm looking for is James in the club, when he's swinging well, the club's coming through and the player's coming through in one go. So nice and kind of connected. So the quality of strikes there, and generally the tolerances on angle of attack and path are less than a degree. So it's a consistent delivery. So we know we're not going to be moving a million miles away from this. But what I'm going to go into, I've got the current PXG to start with from a head standpoint. We're just going to have a look at a couple of different options, go into some steel, go into some different composites, and just look at what they do, and for you, why they produce the results they do, and hopefully this can help kind of people kind of find out, if they're using something, what you might see create certain results or not.
Perfect. So. How are we doing, boss?
Yeah, good.
Excellent.
Good. Yeah, nice to swing there.
Let's go.
Any questions you've got throughout this fitting, do pop them in the message field.
Polite or otherwise.
Oh, I don't care. I'm old enough and ugly enough now.
So when was the last time you played?
Is my wife watching? No, 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
So I'm going to just, with each of these options, the little bit of fiddling around with the lead tape you can see me do is literally just a case of making sure that we're keeping the swing weight relevant. So I've already checked the head for loft and lie.
Evening, Peter. Thank you for tuning in. Yes.
So questions, Niels, any heads you fancy up front?
Yes. Whether or not we've got time to look at those heads.
Care to answer?
Yeah, whether we've got time to look at heads or not this session, I don't know. But
I think with this one, because I think it's best we'll focus on the shafts on this one.
Yeah.
Because I think your action shows up some of, or has always tended to show up some of the small idiosyncrasies in shaft setup, and then we can so you're getting a good luck from the pinder.
Well, I need more than luck from pinder.
And we can then, like we did with my driver fit, I think that's going to take up a decent chunk of time, and then we can focus on heads and do that in the next
Perfect.
session. So initially go on to the KBS Tour. So trying to keep the base weight similar.
So this is the 110.
Yeah. So whilst technically a kind of regular flex, actually I'm keeping the weight similar. But also, the steel fibers, because the construction aren't as tip heavy as a lot of steel. So I want to go into a steel shaft that's a relatively similar total weight and balance point.
And swing weight of my 6 iron is
D1.5.
And this is
D1.5.
Okay. Felt good. It felt hefty.
Yeah, and I think so. Watching the first things I'm looking for, the first thing's always a bit of a kind of a trial. I'm going to stand up here so I can kind of stand and talk and not. This is a good place to be. Am I right here? Is looking at how clean the move. The first swing's always a little bit of a tester, a little bit of a kind of a trial swing, and then the next ones, if it feels good, tend to be a little bit more positive. So anytime we go a little heavier, or it swings a little heavier for James, it's going to drop in behind a little bit more. So not too, because we kept the weight quite similar. So I was going to comment, because we kept the weight quite similar, we shouldn't see massive differences, but definitely seeing a little bit more of a fetch from behind. I'll watch one more swing there. Yeah, so what's happening a little bit is there where James with these ones is able to draw them back in. That swing there, you can see as you start down, the club just starts to get a little bit latent. Because James has a tendency, if anything, because the swing is there and then up a bit, is if it gets behind, then playing gets there and the face tends to fan a little open, which is why we're seeing that go right. So it's not massively out of sync because it's a similar weight, but it starts to get a little bit.
So what would happen? What would be the consequence of increasing swing weight?
Increasing swing weight.
But keeping the same shaft weight?
For you, pretty negative, because that's going to isolate the head more and get it dropping even more behind and fanning the face open, which then the knock-on effect from there is you're going to close it, or you're forced to have to close it, and that brings it both right and left. Okay. So because of your action and so strong forearms, is that if you've got to save it, it's a hard save, so it's going to rattle left, or you get a little bit late and it goes off right. So if we were just to make it heavier, it just exaggerates that disconnection. Bhupinder, looking forward to seeing what combo Dr. Simon comes up with.
It'll be ready for Mauritius, Bhupinder.
Tony, with the PXGs, are they somewhat easier to fit than other irons due to the customizability of the weights in the club head that are unique to PXG? From a fitting point of view, you can fiddle around with them a little bit more, but it's no different than we would do with lead tape in a fitting session. So from a build point of view, having external weight like Ping do as well, you can use that with Ping, the weight in the toes, or the back weight with PXGs. It makes it a little bit more accessible, and you're not having to rely on tape sticking on the back of the head, but ultimately it just allows you to do with a screw-in weight what we would do with lead tape during the fit anyway to dial it in.
But obviously this was because obviously the Gen 2s aren't on our demo rack, so Simon's picked the current 311p for the purpose of switching out shafts. Okay.
So try not to change the head. Because we're just looking at shafts in particular today. So we know same sort of base weight in steel, maybe a couple of grams heavier, but it just starts to get a little bit more behind. Mark Griffin, does that mean a pull and pull hooks are a symptom of being too light in the head swing weight? Can do, yes, because if it's too light in the head, then you're able to flip at it with the hands a little bit. As long as it depends a bit on the player as to what reaction happens based on the symptoms. So depending on how you build your speed. So for me with light, I get kind of over the top and then I'll hold it off, or I'll hit a bit of a pull. If the shaft weight's good and the head's light, then yes, you're likely just to catapult it through a little bit. But some players like Matt, our other fitter Matt, who swings a very, very strong swing, if you go slightly heavy for him, the club gets stuck and then he snatches it around and that creates a hook for him. Whereas actually light, he tends to leave right. So it's not always the case, but yeah, that can happen.
What is what's up next?
So I'm going to drop a little bit of weight in. It's going to stay in steel. I'm going to drop a little weight. So we're going to go just under the 110 mark. So going to a Nippon 1050.
1050.
So I know I can't afford to go tip heavy in the shaft. So there's a little bit of background info that I've got from other fits that we've done with James, where I know I can't afford to go certain shafts. So if I were to put, for example, a Modus 105 or a Modus 120 in, then I know that bottom end is going to get stuck behind, and that's not going to end particularly well. So just wait for this to load up. Nearly there. There we go. Great. Right. So dropped about 4 or 5 grams. Yeah, so that's back out in front of you more. So that's now not stuck behind,
Felt
and you're
quite
able
nice.
to get that back out in front, and straight away we can see path, a little actually hair out to in, but face to path 0.0, so much squarer hit straight
I
away.
think it's called that frozen rope. That felt really, really,
Yeah.
really good.
Downside, you've got to be aiming at the target if you hit it that straight.
That's the problem.
That's a hard bit.
And that was a bit clunky out. Felt
Yeah,
like
a
it
bit
was
quicker tempo on that. Didn't look didn't look really out of sync on it, but just looked like it just got a little bit out of tempo.
Again, that
Yeah,
felt
and then
lovely.
That got back connected
That
together.
felt
again.
really good.
Excuse me. So so we're back into seeing that shot shape that you're actually kind of wanting to see, but the swing line's been working towards seeing. So back into that little bit of a draw.
Is that on altitude?
Yeah, that one's come out like a bullet. That one came a little bit lower, so you can see turn the loft down a little bit. But yeah, that one there's just better connection, as Neil said. Interesting, the speed range is identical between the different weights, and you get sometimes if you go lighter, you don't have to work as hard, so actually club speed can drop, and some places you go heavier and you've got to fight it a little bit more. But I think for James, it's that body rotation speed, and either the club comes with or it doesn't come with, because if your hands get over involved, then the club face goes offline. So actually, it's not a hand speed; it's very much a turn speed and a collect. So that's certainly a good option.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the Modus 105 just so people can
Yeah,
see
sure.
something, see how that reacts. I'm actually going to put a couple of these out of the way.
So if you guys, anybody's watching from overseas, do let us know where you're tuning in from. Obviously, there's a couple of people here we recognise. And if you're watching this after our broadcast, please do ask any questions. We will always reply to every single question as quickly as we can. Click.
So Mark Griffin saw a video a while back with Sergio, a What's in the Bag video, and he was saying he has special weights in the grips of his irons and that helped him hit it lower. Any reason why that would happen? I mean, weights in the grips of the irons make him hit it lower. It's It's interesting that because that's a counterweighting it, which normally it's one that it depends on the player and how they react to that. So he might feel like that helps him pull on the handle and swing this end, swing grip end of the club and get it covered. But actually, by just weighting up the back end, actually what normally would happen is you're letting someone unload it and add loft. So that's that's very much a player wants a feel, and if that feel helps them, create a delivery pattern that they're comfortable with, that's not really logical in terms of that helping him hit it lower. So if anything, you'd normally say you put weight up the top end, that lets you recover the head more and helps the head come through. So actually, normally more weight in the club head end creates a little bit more of a lag and allows you to delay the hit and de-loft it. So I think that's just a player feeling something they want to. Tony, thanks for the reply. How important is it to be able to feel the weight of the club head in the swing? Asking as I couldn't really feel the club head on my irons yesterday when I was thinking about it. I mean,
I've got terrible feel. I mean, yeah, I've
slight buzz, but it is.
Yeah, my ability to feel a club that's D2, D0, I can't feel it, but what I can feel is a better or worse strike. And more often than not, you fitters generally find the same with high handicap golfers who have no feel, but what they can appreciate is a better quality strike.
Yeah, and you think some players are uber sensitive. Like I'm uber sensitive to head weight.
Modus 105.
And yeah, this one's a Modus 105 in the stiff. And I think so. There are certain players and actions that suit an evenly weighted.
Oh, is it? There we go.
This is an evenly weighted club, and that allows them to deliver the head well. And then there are others that really suit a heavy weight in the bottom end. So, I mean, ultimately, you want to be able to sense the bit you're trying to strike the ball with, but some players are going to have naturally suit a heavier club head or heavier balance versus others. So, but if you can't feel them and you're not getting a good strike, then that would suggest that you need a bit more balance down the bottom end. Yeah.
Okay, right.
So the Modus 105, more of it's a similar weight to the 1050, but it's more weight down the bottom end.
Yeah, that felt good.
Okay, so a little bit more of a closure. Okay.
I couldn't really feel much between those two shafts in terms of weight.
Yeah, base weight within a gram. So
Yeah.
very, very similar base weights, just structurally a little bit different.
Again, that was a clunky strike.
So there's a little bit of, so direction, because the weight's in a decent place, you're able to get the club back pretty well, but actually and this is a real it's a real subtlety thing, but with the other shaft, just looked like you had to do a little bit, we'll see one, had to do a little bit less with the club head through the ball. It looked like you could just turn, collect, and leave the hands out of it, which, so if your hands get involved, that brings in a bigger miss. So I want your hands and arms to be able to just follow your body and collect the ball through. And that just looks a little bit late through the ball. I mean, it's not a bad result. It's the kind of one where you could play it on course, but we're starting to, there's a little bit of left and right in there. So if you just turn and relax and keep going with it, it lags a little bit late. That's then going to force you to collect it, and that brings in the left. So
and
it's close.
And whilst I've only hit three balls, that's a very fair number of shots to judge a shaft and its suitability, because then you adapt.
Yeah, some players adapt within one or two shots, but yeah, everyone's going to adapt in some shape or form. But also by the second and third, you start to build the speed up. If you start to free it up, there's that one right, and that's one where want to naturally see it coming in left. I don't want, the moment you've got to square the face up, that brings in the big old left. So a couple of questions to get back to. Neil Mackey, if I wanted to hit a budget, how easy is it to fit new shafts to my current Ping S55s, which I love? Currently on holiday in Italy. Wife hasn't noticed me watching golf videos currently. Well played. So the answer is, simple. Reshafting pretty much any set of irons, apart from the old through balls that were miserable. S55s are no problem at all. So as long as they're not, because the S55s had a little weight plug in the back, so the little black plasticky insert in the back. That was a weight cartridge, so if there are a kind of a fairly exaggerated weight in the back, then that's the only thing that can make them difficult from a spec point of view. But in terms of practically doing it, no problem at all. And then Richard Skinner, currently playing Gen 3 PXG P irons with a Tour Elevate Stiff. Have my heart set on a set of Mura 502s, which are lovely. Is it possible to manipulate the fit to make these irons more playable? Ultimately, they are basically a blade, so not really. And the better you fit the shaft, the more likely you are to find the middle of the face. So that's where you can kind of help it from that point of view. But in terms of, I mean, Mura's just, they're very traditional head shapes. They're not the most forgiving creatures. They're beautifully made, lovely in terms of offset lines and things like that. But I mean, 50% of forgiveness is between the ears, I think, in terms of whether you believe you're going to get a good result out of the club. If you stand over a club and think, my God, if I don't get this perfect, I'm not getting it there, then you're never going to get the best out of them because you're going to be worried about a miss hit. If you can go, a miss hit comes up short, I miss hit it, never mind, then that helps. But yeah, you cut the 502s, which are the blades with a bit of a muscle bar up the back. They're still a blade with very little offset, so there's not an awful lot you can do.
Euro CB 201s, I think I had a set of those about 17, 18 years ago. They were so good.
Yeah, the original kind of muscle cavity ones, yeah. So then Matt Giles, just reshafted my Swix irons from S400 to KBS Tour 105. Is that strange going down 20 grams in shaft? Not if it's the right one. You know, there are a lot of players that, I mean, S400 is just heavy. I mean, so it's not uncommon if you're in those to drop quite a bit of shaft weight, because the only way you can go is down in weight from those. So it's definitely not uncommon to do that. So going to go bit of a change up in shaft type. So whilst we looked at the steels in that kind of 107, 108 gram area, going to go into some composites. So if we go lighter than that 105 area, James is just going to overpower them. So going back into some graphites to compare, looking at the Axiom. So, you know, great quality shaft with the Velocor material in the tip, and in the 105, you know, similar comparable weight. These ones do swing balance differently, so the swing weight is heavier on these naturally by a couple of points. So this is almost exaggerating.
I know I said I couldn't feel swing it, but I can on this one.
I'd hope so. So, you know, where the Modus is a little bit heavier in the tip, this one, a bit like the MMTs, is a bit more exaggerated. So very much down that bottom third of the shaft.
This feels like it's going to be hard to hit, hard work.
Okay. It's generally not a great precursor to a swing.
Wow. But it felt good.
So the one thing that I would notice straight was clubhead speed's very similar. Definitely a change in tempo.
Okay.
Just a slightly delayed tempo so that the club didn't get away from you. But nice result. Lower spin, which I have seen from this shaft before. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So what we get in that one, so the first one was a kind of let's see what happens to the swing. That one then a little bit more into it, and then we start to see a little bit of a snap through.
Okay.
So in terms of if you're generally someone who prefers to be a full shot rather than a partial swing, then...
Yeah, I always go, partial swing is trouble.
Then the more you commit with this, the more you're going to see that bottom end go a little bit out of kilter. Good evening, Mr. Hurley. Yeah, so what you've done, I mean, it's hard to criticise that shot. However, I can see you've gone, that second one was a bit quicker, more natural tempo. That last one, you've then reverted back and just slowed it down again. So, and the other bit, it's taken a bit of spin off. And so where you tend to get a little stronger on launch angle, this is knocking the spin down a little bit more as well. But my concern would be on course is that bottom end's just going to get a little bit away from you. I've seen others swing better than that.
I don't play much golf, but some of the golf I do play is mildly competitive, and it just brings in the left side of the course when these arms get.
And it's foursome, so your partner wouldn't thank you as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go back into like a fuller swing.
Okay.
Just commit through. Yeah, and there's that little bit. And so the results almost belie it a little bit. There's that little bit of a follow-up to it. I'm going to put something back in just to go back to a little slightly more neutral progression of weight through. Just to showcase what it does. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to put the 1050 back in very quickly.
I'm trending.
Yeah, so if I go back into that steel, so it's again within 1 or 2 grams, and it's going back to the 1050, just to see if we go back to something that's a little bit more evenly balanced through. This is one of those, you open your mouth and commit to something, but I'm expecting to see it look a little bit cleaner and a little bit more connected, more all in one go through the ball. Yeah, so difference there.
Good.
Yeah, so the difference there is that as you come through the ball, with that shaft, it's more there and everything.
It just felt
everything
better
through in one
timed.
go and extending together rather than that little bit of a catapult.
That's a relief.
So,
Well, Simon has always said I'm not the easiest of fits.
no. Yeah, I'm glad I know you swing well. But because of that strong recovery with your hands through the ball. So I'm going to go into, so the Axiom's a little bit exaggerated.
Is that quite a? I mean, I'm not a. My particular skill set lies in the workshop, not in the fitting bay. Is that quite a low spin number in launch?
Launch is down a little bit. Spin relative to launch is slightly higher than you were with the Axiom, but we've seen that from the Axiom shaft. It can take a little bit of spin off, and that launch angle's down a little bit. But that's something I think the more your hands quieten down and you stop having to recover it, then you stop turning loft off. So then you can because you can then just leave the face there, you can leave the loft back on. Then you've got to recover it, turns the loft down. Whereas for you, I'd like to see you kind of being able just to turn it through and leave that loft.
And what's the loft on?
This is at 30 degrees.
Okay, which is
relatively weak. So it's exactly the same
as
loft
mine.
as the current ones. Yeah. So just switching up, going to the Sinister 110. So this is one where they've actually.
Gosh, if you guys haven't seen this paint job, hats off to Heather Afable for this beauty. There we go.
So this one structure, there's a little bit of effectively kind of tungsten material, more dense material in the tip. They've built it into the pre-preg, so the balance sits for a composite more in the bottom end rather than like a steel fiber has some steel filaments wrapped around it and a graphite core. This one, within the bonds, there's some extra mass into the tip end to get the weight flowing through the bottom end. Now this one is it's a parallel shaft. I've said to Vic that I would like them to make a constant weight of this, something progressive weight, because I think this would really suit. But it'd be interesting going back into this a couple of grams heavier, how this one swings. In answer to the questions, would swing weight be the same through the entire set or differ from woods to irons to wedges? It does differ. Quite often you get the same swing weight on a 6-iron and a driver. I'm sure there's some physics around why those two tend to match up, but we would generally build some progression of swing weight through, so lighter in the long irons, a little heavier in the short irons, because the amount of energy you put into the handle changes when you're hitting a longer club to a shorter club, and swing speed changes, the static balance, the swing weight has to progress a certain amount. Otherwise, you'd either, if you had the same pitch wedge and 3-iron swing weight, 3-iron's going to get really stuck behind, and the pitch wedge will be okay, or the 3-iron's going to come through well, and you're just going to lose the head on the 6-iron. So we would always build the progression in through the set, cool. Particularly with the irons.
If you're just joining, so all these clubs I'm testing are the same length, same head weight because we're using the same head, exact same swing weight. So we
The
just
swing weight varies a little bit depending on the shaft.
Okay.
So we can't get them, so the Axiom
because of the balance point of
can't
the
get
shaft.
it to match exactly, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So it's a little heavier. So trying to keep as fewer variables as possible. Dave Hurley, would a spinnier ball help? If the end result was that the spin came out a little flatter, either loft up a little bit or you can use a spinnier ball. We're using ProView on X at the moment, which is James's gamer.
Right.
Mr. Warhound, thank you for joining. Come in late, got to run. What was the purpose of the fit? Just wants new toys, basically. Nothing really changed, just fancy something new. Okay, interesting. So what's interesting, so this is back a similar weight to the steel fibers that you play, and that one's the first one that's got into the mat a little bit more, so that's just dropped in behind you more.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can see you've got to work harder with that and starting to get that little bit of a separation, a little bit of a jerkiness to the swing. So, and taking that into account with this one and anything at this weight that's a parallel, so a unitized shaft. So actually it gets lighter as you cut it shorter. That's going to mean the long runs are going to swing harder work than that, and that's just going to make them impossible. So
want that. If you're watching and you're not currently subscribed, guys, please do hit our subscribe button right now whilst you're watching. It really does help us grow the channel. Share with your friends. We want to bring you so much interesting information, not just from fitting, but from other areas of the golf industry as well. So subscribe and spread the word.
Like and everything. Bhupinder, are you having to make allowances for the connector? So actually what we do is we actually just grind a little weight off the hosel. So it accounts for the weight. It's about 4 or 5 grams, 5 or 6 grams that the connector is. So one, the part on the bottom that we glue onto the club head, and then this bit collectively is sort of 6 to 8 grams. So yeah, we do adjust literally grind a bit off the hosel to account for that. So it essentially is the same weight as the standard production head.
Neil, don't burn those sausages.
I've been caught. Well, I'm sure the meal will be sensational.
It's just a question. Neil, Scott.
So Neil, apologies for the ignorance. Practically, how does it work to fit new shafts to my old heads? And do you get me to hit something similar? Yeah, absolutely. We get you to hit something as similar as possible.
Which is kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah. So like for James's set, we can't use the Gen 2s because they went years back, so we haven't got those in the demo rack. So we'd use a head that's not going to augment performance. So if you've got the S55s, we'd probably look at something like a blade, or even the S59s aren't that different. Use that as a benchmark and then look at shaft options from there. So going into the Accra TZ, the Tour Z iron
New
shaft,
this year,
the
the
105. This is a new one, last couple of months or so, last few months. Just dropping the weight back down from the Sinister, seeing going into this again. This still swings fairly strong on swing weight, this one.
That's gone left.
But dropping the total weight, much easier to collect and square off. Too easy to square off by the looks of it.
Yeah.
Going back to this, not quite enough to hit against and able to flip it over. Dave Hurley, putter fitting next. We will, at some point, we just got to get the camera set up upstairs correctly to be able to do it properly. We will do a putter fitting at some point, for sure.
It feels that the takeaway feels different.
Okay, yeah, so if you go a little bit light, and I certainly find this, is that as the club takes away...
It feels like I'm doing that.
Yeah, so because if there's not enough weight, the club doesn't actually... You're trying to create equal forces, so an energy into the handle, inertia in the club match up. If you get that, then the club literally tracks and stays in plane. If it gets a little light, then it can feel like you're able to overpower the weight and flick it up a little bit. So that takeaway can feel like it does that.
Yeah. Which is a shame, because the last 2 shafts I really had quite like the idea of playing.
And that's where it then goes left, because the moment it goes, you kind of pick it up and it goes that way a little bit. Then as you come down, you're able to overpower and flip over a bit as well. So, so you'd then end up, all that would happen is the player would adjust and start to steer it and back off a little bit to make it work.
No, I've lost lost confidence with this now.
See, I can't stop a swing like that. I'd still hit it ropey.
Oh,
Yeah. So it just doesn't swing right for you because everything's then going left. So
yeah.
So
Not for me.
Mark Griffin, I believe cut some of the hosel off to counter the weight of adapters. So true weight of the built club, exactly that. Yeah, and that's the compensation on these. And then Richard Skinner, what's been most popular selling irons this year?
Well, last year would have been the Strixon ZX7. There were a few stock shortages, and it would have blown. What ended up? It was 223, I think, was in it.
Well, certainly first half of this year, I think that's been very popular. The new Titleist models they're gonna go really well. 100, 150, 150 in particular. I think G430, 425 we did well with last year. That forgiveness. The I230's done well. Be interesting to see what happens with the new Callaway irons. But yeah, the Mizunos have done well this year for sure. The 923 high launch, getting that where there's a bit more flight on it, that's been a good addition this year too. Hosels look shorter. The hosels look shorter just because of the bit that's glued on. So, but we have had to grind them down a little bit.
We take anything between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch off the hosel, which takes the weight out that you're reintroducing with the shaft adapter.
So I'm going to, out of interest, I'm just going to put your Steelfiber back in. Almost now we've gone through several different shafts. That essentially gets you out of the habit and out of the flow with your current clubs.
One thing to note is that my club speed has been at about 88, 89 throughout the duration of this test. So in the past there are cynics about fitting that your club speed starts to increase throughout the fitting. So this hasn't been the case in this situation. But we're going to go back to my.
You can see here your current ones. You're at 89.
Yeah.
And actually went into the steel, went to 90, then 89, 89.7, 89.3, 89.4. 88.6 with that last one, you had to slow it down with the TZ to get control of it.
Yeah.
So actually, lighter actually slowed you down a little.
Okay.
So yeah, very, very repetitive on club speed. So I'm just going to put this back, so go back to your current setup, essentially. Let's get that swing weight matched up. Just see going back to that. So one of the things we'll always do is exactly this, so go back to...
so this is what I play in the same head, not my original 6-iron.
Yeah. Because by going around to different things, it gets you out of your... If there are any habits and any compensations happening with your current clubs,
I've got plenty of habits.
Desensitise to those, so this is almost of a true test of the shaft, really. So what's interesting is your comment earlier on was you felt they were slightly harder work than you wanted them to be, and immediately going back to it, that's that right-hand side one, just looks a little on your back hip.
Yep.
It's the same as that KBS Tour that was that little bit heavier, and off it goes to the right. So just not quite as clean through the back of the ball. Dave Hurley, what you said on swing weight in each iron, would that explain why swing my 6 and 8 irons better than the rest? Rest swing just feels better hitting them. Potentially, yeah, those two might just be optimised a little bit more. That looks like you've got to kind of wind it up and load
I don't like him anymore.
You see, we found a justification for new clubs. Excellent.
I will blame anything I can.
Yeah, some can just be, and it can be literally as little as half a gram differential on the heads. But yeah, if you have a set of clubs with matching components and I've cut one or two of them, one just swings better. It's just better set up for you. But that progression in swing weight is something that we'd always build in.
God, I remember the days where you wanted to play the heaviest and stiffest shaft you could. I remember before we set up Precision Golf, I dabbled with some Project X, and when you've gone too stiff and too heavy.
Yeah, when your elbows hurt.
Because you can't even launch them.
Mm. Yeah, we've all done it as well. I mean, I certainly in years gone by, I used to play X100s and Project X 6.5s, and I can't think of anything worse now. So my wrist just hurt thinking about it.
Well, so back in the day, back in 2003, you took a break from playing through a slight illness and didn't hit a club for ages.
Well, I
and
said
you went,
slight illness. I had a viral throat infection. Didn't touch a club for a month and a half.
and when you went back to hitting them, you said they felt like sledgehammers.
It felt like one of those momentous swing trainers. I couldn't believe how heavy they felt. Now, granted, I'd been laid up doing nothing for a month and a bit. I'd lost a lot of weight. Lost a lot of weight though. But it's about the only time I'd had a six-pack, I think, through malnutrition.
Six-pack of what?
Yeah. But yeah, like first swing, it just didn't feel like my clubs, and then how few shots I could actually hit with them. So going back to that,
Feels really, really good.
yeah. So it's faded a little bit.
Yeah,
but
that was a bit of a nervy
connection
swing though. I'm
through
not,
the shot,
not
really,
fussed
really
about that.
clean.
Let me just go through this.
Scooby, evening gents, fellow precisioners. Similar question to Richard, but on shafts. What's the most popular iron shafts this year? Well, I mean, popular ones. The Modus are very popular, but when we say popular, we just mean we fit them the most, which is no. I wouldn't call them popular, but just functionally what works for a lot of players.
No, that was horrid. Sorry.
Modus. It's not Jones' finest swing, that one. So that's the one where occasionally a swing floor just whip it inside and then it's got to recover it. So, let's see. I mean, KBS did do quite a few of the KBS, particularly in the kind of 115, 120s. Let me see, what do we do a lot of? We did quite a few of the Steelfibers in the 80. Yeah, so that move there is the one where for me, that just looked so connected through. Looked like you can put some speed in and everything comes through. So the exit, body, arms, club are all going through in one go. And you get that extended line through the ball.
But the confidence of being able to strike a club that feels right. I don't want to take anything away from that Accra shaft because in the right hands they are phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
For
There
me,
isn't a bad shaft out there. It's just good or bad for the player.
Yeah, for me, I lost all confidence with that particular shaft weight. That profile.
Yeah, just a little light. Little light, little kind of club head heavy, little light in the shaft, and then the control's gone.
And only until hitting these had made me realise that potentially the steel fibres are a little on the heavy side.
A little bit, yeah. So we're looking at 110 on the steel fibre, 110, 111, 107, 108 on this. It's literally 3 grams.
It's not much,
No.
but the difference is huge.
Yeah, and you can see, first swing back. Okay, the second one was a bit of a funky one, but first swing back, it's what we're looking to do with the clubs is take out compensations. So the less compensating you got to do. Now, sometimes there's technique issues, which mean that a player's got a quirk of an action, and then the way up is right. Is that just the way you're going to swing, or actually, if you do some swing work, could you improve, noticeably, and then would that affect the fitting? On something like irons, often that's just the line through the ball. It's not like a driver. Or fairway where you're going to change the flight massively and need a completely different head style. And the shorter shaft makes them more manageable most of the time. But it's the cleaner, the more in sync the player and the club, the more consistent you can deliver the head, and the more these bits can just go with the flow, as in hands and arms can go with the flow and just collect. That's when you start to get consistency of trajectory, of contact, of distance. Yeah, you're not going to suddenly get one long left, short right, because that only happens when you've got to manipulate and collect. And for you,
this just felt like it was with me.
So much simpler through the ball. The interesting bit is, in the past that would have been too light. Now you're developing. I've had to go lighter. Yeah, thanks for that. I've had to go lighter over the years. So, but actually, that now. I wouldn't have picked us going into steel. No, I thought we'd stay in the composite.
Wouldn't have thought of
and this
is 15 years ago, but
quite an old school shaft. The 950, 1050s have been around quite a long time.
About 20, just over 20 years.
Yeah.
But look, Dynamic Gold's been around 40 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 40, 45. Yeah, even longer. And so something like this, it just. That you can see it just works better, and actually you'll get some of the feel that you haven't had with the steel fibres. You'll get back going into steel because the wall thickness is much thinner. So, as a visual on this, you can see on the steel fibre shaft. Let me know if that is clear enough. How thick the walls are on that, and then the Modus 105. And this is a reinforced tip on a steel shaft. How much thinner that wall is. So how much less material there is in the steel, you're naturally getting a little bit more, you're going to get a little bit more load, a little bit more recovery through it because the wall thickness isn't quite as harsh. And that's where some of the verticals, the dead feel out of the steel fibers, because they're stable tip and they've got a lot of wall thickness. That's where some of that deadness comes from.
And not spinny at a lighter weight?
No, well, it doesn't, just because it's lighter doesn't make it spinnier. I mean, the steel fibers are, in principle, a lower spin shaft, but actually that shot there, you're still just under the 5,000 mark. You know, we definitely can't afford to drop any spin, but that's just where your action is, because it's there as an action. You kind of, it's almost like a flat forehand in tennis rather than a drop shot. You do hit down on it, but you hit there with it. It's almost a slight forward, I won't say forward roll, but you have a bit of rotation of your forearm through, and that turns the flight down a little bit. So it's a mid to strong flight, but the proportion of spin to launch angle really isn't bad at all. Couple of the questions: what irons do I play? I play Miuras. I play a Miura MB101 5-iron pitch wedge. I play a PXG 311T Gen 323 4-iron just to get a bit of tech and bridge it up to a driving iron. But I play the Oben CT115 soft-stepped stiff shaft. So about 113 gram shaft. That's my irons. I played Miura blades for, we've been in business nearly 20 years, for 19 years. So I do rather like a blade. Yes, it's that one there. That swing there is the one that's just spot on it, because
Sold.
Just that connection. I'm going to do a little fiddle with head weight quickly. Niels, can you lighten a slightly too heavy shaft with a counterweight? It's one of those ones where that's a last ditch. So from our point of view, you want, if you need to go lighter, make the shaft lighter. A counterweight is making it heavier to make it swing lighter. So it's a little bit arse about face, in that there's a phrase called polishing something that
YouTube.
You're
Sort of the BBC.
like polishing a turd, essentially, if you're going to have to do that, in that you're back weighting to bring the balance point up. So if it's already too heavy, you're making it heavier to make it swing lighter, and that just doesn't work for me. If the dead weight's heavy, it's going to get behind you, and then you risk getting that bit of a flip and a catapult. So I would never like doing that if we can really. That's a last-ditch attempt. And then Mark Griffin, do you ever or would you recommend going longer in shaft for someone who likes the feel of gripping down, so they don't actually lose any length, or the grips that don't flare out at the end? You can do that as long as you're consistent with where you grip it. Then someone like Per Ulrik Johansson, going back a few years, Ryder Cup player, gripped kind of down, effectively down there. How visible is that? Yeah. So he was down about an inch. So if it's something you do, it helps if you can have a grip that has a marker on it, whether it's at the bottom for like the VDRs here have those little marks on. So something like that gives a visual help to grip it in the same place each time.
Our very good friend Tony Johnston always, everything from 9-iron down was 9-iron length.
Yeah. Now the head weights can make it complicated with that, but grip. If you're doing it because of size, then that's one thing. If you're doing it because it's just where it's a comfort blanket, then that's another. So size-wise, there are some grips that don't flare out as much at the end. Some of the Iomics don't as much. Which ones? There are a couple of others that don't. I'm trying to remember what they are. But yeah, there are some with a narrower cap at the top. Anything with a multi-compound and multiple materials is going to have a flare out at the top, because they've got to bond the layers together. It's like a CP2 series. They've got the cap and the core and then the outer line, so that kicks out a little bit, but there are some grips that don't.
We're probably don't have enough time, but again, this would then lead doubt into the weight of my wedge shafts as well, which I don't know. What am I playing?
Yeah, I think
Modus 120 in those.
Yeah, and those, yeah. So it's highly likely that by dropping a little bit of weight in the iron shafts, it might not affect the wedge shafts, because you're reducing a little bit of the speed through the ball. It might not mean going lighter, but
generally happy with my wedges.
Chances are it might be a little bit. Mr. Skinner, it's very kind of you. I'm glad you're enjoying the content. I'm not gonna call that out myself and call myself that, but it's
no, you
have been
I
called
think Stuart,
the doctor and the pharmacist.
Stuart,
before.
I called you Stuart. Christ, we've been in business for the last 20 years together. Simon has to be one of the most knowledgeable minds in the world. It's
kind.
yeah.
Very kind.
What he doesn't know about fitting really isn't worth knowing.
Well, but they're always learning, and that's where you're 20 years worth, you're always seeing things that you haven't seen before. So you're always picking something up and sometimes reminding yourself of stuff that's happened. So it is a bit of osmosis. That's I hope I'm going to pronounce it right. Rogelio Mendez. I have a Ventus TR Black 7X. Top speed I've seen is about 113. Enjoy the shaft. Wonder if there's a lighter shaft option that can enable higher swing speed and create good launch. Okay, one of those definitely maybe. I mean, the TR Black's sort of a 78, 79 gram. So 113 is a good amount of speed, but isn't, if we're being realistic, kind of the speeds that you can see and that shaft can cope with, it's not that much. So you'd be looking at maybe 118, 120. You might sort of, if you're looking purely at club speed, which we don't, but if you can purely at club speed, then that shaft can cope with more, but it's more how you develop your speed. So, if you're enjoying it, you probably don't want to drop much weight. 3 to 5 grams would be enough to notice a difference. But the TR isn't too tip heavy. You might want to try, you could probably, if you like that tighter feel, something like a Speed NX70 wouldn't be a bad shout if you want the firmer feel, the green. But yeah, you wouldn't want to drop down much below 74, 75 grams if you're enjoying the way that shaft swings. So what I've done very briefly, we know that swings well. I've added a bit of lead tape to that. This is what we do to kind of top and tail and effectively kind of dot the I's and cross the T's. So we know that shaft swings well. In its previous setup, balance was D1.9, so a little bit heavier than your steel fibers, but the lighter shaft weight and the natural balance point the shaft have created that. But I've just pushed the head weight a little heavier just to check if we go a bit heavier, you're always doing, is it a good or a bad change? We want to make absolutely certain. So making the head a little heavier, I know what I'd expect to see, but
Slightly low. It felt like it was a bit lower on the face.
a little bit, yeah. And so generally speaking for James, if we isolate head weight, it starts to get a little bit of a hands, a little bit of a wrap and a collection in. So if anything for James, slightly on the lighter side versus heavier side would often be a...
Strike didn't feel as good as...
Yeah. What's interesting, I can start to see that little bit of rotation coming in. So we're losing, as I was saying, that kind of length, that extension through the ball, which keeps the face online.
So how many swing weight points has this gone up? Half?
Half a point, yeah.
Half a point.
So
one gram on the head?
Yeah. Mark Griffin, do you have any guidelines for what grip size you should be using? I've seen videos saying it affects ability to turn over the club face or leave it open. Many are conflicting on its effect.
No.
So that's just lost kind of cleanliness of strike there.
But just literally 1 gram. I mean, that that's how tight the tolerances we can build to.
So, and to answer the question on grip type, and really it's about, some of it's a feel thing. So anything too small, then it's a bit like me holding the shaft here. That can move around. There's space in and around there. There's all that overlap and wrap over. So you can see actually how kind of white knuckled everything is there. I've got to cling on tight to stop it moving around. So going too small can create kind of a big recovery and then a hold off. Too big, it just doesn't, if I'm going to get a grip that's too big for me just to show it.
Okay. How are we doing for time, Maestro?
Yeah, nearly done. So if I go to a mid-size there, that little finger it just about gets round, but if I put any force on that, it slips off. It doesn't get all the way around and clamp it in. So if those fingers don't meet, I've got to force it close. So again, I've got to use my hands and forearms and the muscles to kind of really close it on. And that can often lead to a bit of a steer because it's harder to wrap that over. So in theory, bigger grip, it's like the Jumbo Maxes, bigger grip makes it harder to over-rotate. But if you get it fitting someone's hands correctly, you can relax on the club, get maximum control for least pressure and maximum freedom through the ball. So I would always go on that. But it's a mixture of a few things. It's a mixture of, so I don't have long fingers to palm size, but I play a slightly bigger grip size because it's a wingspan that way. And then in the bottom hand, if you've got a long length here between base of the thumb and that first knuckle, then it means you've got more distance there to wrap around the bottom of the grip, so you generally need less tapering. So those are a couple of things to look out for. I guess to go back to that one that you just hit, taking the weight off the club.
Yeah,
and it's
again,
gone dead straight again. So
again,
just taking that bit of extra swing weight off.
Completely different feel.
Path, face to path, 0.2, 0.3. That's the bit that means for James, he doesn't have to do that and catapult it, so he can just rotate and collect and square off.
And also at the other end of the club, sometimes if you ever make a change in grips as well, and you switch to a different model of grip that you'd originally been fitted with, if you have been fitted, then don't expect the clubs to feel the same.
Yeah,
because
grip weight changes quite a bit. Yeah. That's something that we've become more and more keen on the last couple of years, is make sure that you don't go to if you change a grip by 6 or 7 grams, you've got to change the head by a couple of grams, you're 10 grams heavier total weight. And as we've just seen there, 1 and a bit grams makes a big difference.
Yeah, and if you're changing total dead weight by 10 grams, and we've seen the difference in performance between my original Steelfiber 110 counterweight, constant weight, and the Modus. Modus.
The 1050. Yeah.
1050. That was what? How many? 3 grams? 4 grams?
Yeah, so 3 or 4 grams in the shaft weight, and your complete weight on the 2 clubs. Bear in mind there are marginal variances in grip. Yeah, they're 424 plays. 423 actually total weight there. Actually, the total weight is as good as identical, but the distribution's different. And even though that one is barely heavier, you could see it was harder work to do. So it's
thank you, Simon. I'm playing golf on Friday, and I'm going to hate playing with my clubs.
Just have to hulk up and hit them hard. So I think we're running out to mark grip, and so ideally all fingers should touch the pad or close to, certainly in the top hand. Bottom hand, it's just a little bit of making sure that you're not having to close your hand down onto the bottom half of the grip and get it sitting comfortably in the fingers so you can relax both hands. So thank you very much for.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you
everyone.
for swinging. Maybe the stress at the beginning helped you not focus on the golf.
It wasn't the smoothest starts to my debut behind the camera. But
it's the words you don't want to hear at the beginning of one of these is we haven't got any internet.
The panic on Paul Matthews' face when he said we've got a streaming issue, which is why I think a few of you saw black for a while. But thank you so much for joining us once again. We do need the comments. We love coming up with new, interesting, innovative content for you guys. So please do subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon so you get the notifications when we do eventually go live. And we will see you next week. Whether or not we do club heads next week or...
Yeah, major club heads next week. We're still trying to line up a few guests for Zooms and things as well. But we'll try and we'll certainly do the second half, whether it's next week or week after. But we'll
Lovely.
Do them soon. So thanks for staying with us. Thanks for sticking in for about an hour and a half. And,
Great. See you next
soon.
week.
Thanks a lot.